Well, hello there. It's My Nerd World, a Star Wars podcast. I'm your host, Jon Justice. Glad you're with the show again this week because we've got things to talk about. Bob Iger shocked the world, says he's stepping down as CEO. Another Bob is going to replace him. I'll give you my thoughts on that. There's not a lot to talk about when it comes to Bob Iger stepping down. Who knows what this means for Star Wars, but I'll share a few of my thoughts. Speaking of sharing thoughts, I will share those about Clone Wars Episode 2 of Season 7. Always enjoy Clone Wars, and the new season is no different than the older seasons. It's just as great. What in the Sam heck is a High Republic? I'm sure you've heard about it by now. I'll share my thoughts. I have many of this Project Luminous book project that Lucasfilm is working on. Speaking of books, the Rise of Skywalker book is making the rounds, and I have some pages from the end of the story, specifically those key moments between Ben and Rey that have been so controversial for so many people. Again, I'll share some thoughts on that. And speaking of the Rise of Skywalker, I'm going to get into a little bit more of my own plot commentary, as I mentioned on listener feedback this week. This really is becoming a favorite movie of mine, not just as a Star Wars film, but just as a film in general. So, let's get into it. As always, My Nerd World is brought to you by the Embark Space Opera series, written by yours truly. If you want to support the show, I hope, if you haven't done so already, you will pick up a copy of Embark 1 or 2 in ebook, paperback, or audiobook. Book number 3 is coming out in late April, so it's not too late to get on board the adventure, and I'll have more details about that later on in today's episode.
It's an instinct. A feeling. The Force brought us together. We're not alone. Good people will fight if we lead them.
People keep telling me they know me. No one does.
But I do.
Long have I waited. And now you're coming together. Is your undoing.
Confronting fear is the destiny of a Jedi. Your destiny. The Force will be with you.
Always.
My Nerd World.
I love that movie so much. I really, really do. I cannot wait to get the digital release here in the next couple of weeks. Comes out on the 17th, and then the physical copy at the end of March. I'm so excited to get my hands on this film. And like I said in the intro, and I said on listener feedback this week, this movie is it's resonating with me in a way that I just did not expect it to do. I love, obviously, science fiction in general, and space operas in general. I'll start it with my love of Star Wars. But this Rise of Skywalker film, as a Star Wars movie, I feel so connected to it. And as just a movie in general, as an entertaining movie, I feel that I love it even if it wasn't a Star Wars movie. And I don't want to repeat a bunch of what I said on listener feedback this week. I don't know. In certain movies, they resonate with you. And Star Wars movies obviously do, but I love Star Wars. But there's just something special about The Rise of Skywalker that it ticks off all the boxes for me of what I'm looking for, not just in a movie, but certainly in a Star Wars movie. Welcome to My Nerd World, the Star Wars podcast. Again, I am your host, Jon Justice, and I'm glad you're with the show this week. Really excited to talk Star Wars, as I am every single week. And we got a lot to cover. This High Republic initiative, this this combination of writers coming together to craft these stories based 200 years before The Phantom Menace took place. I'm going to give you my thoughts on it and my honest thoughts on it, because I've got a lot of questions. And I do have some concerns too. So I'll share those with you, along with later in the show, after we talk High Republic. I do have some excerpts from the Rise of Skywalker novel, which provide some really interesting details to those final moments between Ben and Rey in the Rise of Skywalker. And then I'll also continue to talk a little bit about just my commentary about the plot of the movie. Started that a couple episodes ago, and I'll wrap it up again this week. But we'll start off with Bob Iger. So Bob Iger made the announcement earlier this week. It was on Tuesday that he was going to be stepping down as the CEO of Disney. And another Bob Padich, something like that. Another Bob is going to supersede him, an individual who's been with the company for a long, long time. Bob Iger said that his contract is up in December of 2021. He's been serving in this position as CEO of Disney and Lucasfilm now for 15 years, and said that he wants to spend the last bit of his time there focusing on the creative side of things. And I think Bob Iger is somebody who is very much concerned with the legacy that he leaves behind. He's going to be known as, a very successful Disney CEO, but a CEO of Disney that was able to acquire all the major IPs out there, whether it's 20th Century Fox or Star Wars or Marvel. Bob Iger can lay claim to being the individual who brought all those different IPs on board with Disney. What does this mean for the future of Star Wars? I don't know. It really comes down to how big of an impact the Bob Iger had on Lucasfilm and their decisions anyways. I mean, I think it was Bob's idea to get a movie out in 2015. And we know it was Bob's idea to get that trailer out at the end of 2014 for The Force Awakens. Remember that. We know that Bob wanted that second Star Wars movie, being Solo, released so soon, 6 months after The Last Jedi, which didn't work out so well. But I don't really know exactly, what kind of input the other Bob is going to have, what his thoughts on Star Wars are. It'll all just have to remain to be seen. I think for the near future, plans probably aren't going to change all that much. Another article came out from the Walt Disney Company, and it had their slate of movies for the next several years, and those Star Wars films are still on the schedule for 2022, 2024, and 2026. Even though we don't know what they are yet, I imagine by the time Celebration comes around later this year, we'll have a pretty good idea. And I'm wondering too if there is any or how much attention is going to be paid to the High Republic announcement and the details of that endeavor by the publishing wing of Lucasfilm, how much that's going to end up weighing on whatever that next movie is going to be. According to what we've been told so far, whatever is happening with the High Republic is separate from the films. I really kind of hope it is, and I'll explain about that a little bit later. But as always, throughout the show this week, if you want to add your thoughts about any of the topics that I cover, email me, talkshownerd@gmail.com, or leave a comment up on YouTube. The second episode of Clone Wars, following the Bad Batch arc, came out on Friday. Actually, I just watched it this morning with my 13-year-old son and enjoyed it. Look, I'm excited to be watching new Clone Wars. I don't want to say otherwise. If I don't seem like, woohoo, Clone Wars, it's because it's Clone Wars. It's cool. I love seeing anything new Star Wars, and I love the Clone Wars, but it's not like we're watching like The Mandalorian and it's something brand new and different that we haven't seen before. This is the Clone Wars that we have grown to love throughout those first 6 seasons, and now we're getting this 7th season. This Bad Batch arc is pretty cool. I like these cast of characters. It reminds me a bit of the stories that I'm writing in my Embark series. Shameless plug, but you got to sell books, and selling books is hard. You can go to Amazon.com and look for Embark, Jon Justice, and pick up your copy of either the first 2 books. The third one will be out in late April. That will close out the trilogy, and I'll have more details about this a little bit later on. But it is cool. It is cool seeing this Bad Batch and these different clones. the parts of this episode that I enjoyed more, and a bit of a spoiler alert, but the parts of the episode that I enjoy more and what I'm most looking forward to in the Clone Wars Season 7 series is the stuff that ties directly into Revenge of the Sith. And seeing Anakin and Padme covertly having conversations via hologram from great distances, talking about the Outer Rim sieges, all these things that play into Revenge of the Sith, that's the stuff that I want to see. I want to see that connective tissue. That's the thing I loved about the Genndy Tartakovsky Clone Wars cartoons that came out, the 2D animation that was the test bed for the Clone Wars that we got, was that Genndy actually wrapped up that Clone Wars, those 2 seasons of Clone Wars, with tying directly into that opening battle of Revenge of the Sith. That's rad. If you go and watch that last episode, it's a fantastic little prequel from the Clone Wars, that 2D Genndy Tartakovsky one. It is a fantastic little prequel leading into the movie itself, and I've actually done that. If you watch all those Clone Wars, it's about 2 hours worth of content, so it's a fun little cartoon preview that you can kind of get into between Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. Now, it's not canon anymore, and I'm cool with that. They are really fun to watch, though. So I am just praying that that's what we get in the final episode of Season 7 is an episode that ties just directly into Revenge of the Sith the way that Rogue One tied into A New Hope. That's what I'm really hoping for. I know we're going to get the siege at Mandalore, but I'm really hoping that's how this season ends up wrapping up. So I'm digging it. I like it. I like those little moments. The animation's fun, fantastic as Clone Wars. Clone Wars is always great. I don't know really what else to say other than that. Let's shift gears and get to something a little bit more controversial.
This is not going to go the way you think.
Yeah, I don't really know how this is going to go. So, Project Luminous has been teased now for well over a year. Well, about a year, I guess, starting with Celebration. And the announcement was finally made on Monday. Lucasfilm to launch Star Wars The High Republic publishing campaign in 2020. So what I want to do here is I want to go back to the initial leak that took place. I apologize for what just happened there a moment ago. My phone went off. I want to go back to makingstarwars.net and the leak that took place several months back. So this is an article written by Jason Ward. This goes to actually about 2 months ago, January 4th. And this is what he said, and then we can kind of compare that to what we got with the announcement of the High Republic and what this could potentially mean beyond what was actually reported. Okay, so this was the leak initially. Jason Ward writes this: "My informants recently told me that the Cassian and Obi-Wan Kenobi Disney Plus shows are supposed to be coming to Pinewood since the other studio spaces have recently become unavailable, and the next Star Wars film is thought to be there as well. My sources also elaborated on what the film series would be. Sources are saying that the Star Wars saga is going to take place during an era called the High Republic era. It sounds like the setting is 400 years before the Skywalker saga. We know that the publication part of this is 200 years. Okay, the new saga is set during a time that the Sith's rule of two has been established by Darth Bane, and Yoda is a Jedi, but isn't the old Jedi we know from the Skywalker era. These new films will not make up a trilogy, but rather a series of films, which will be released in the same story era and interconnect. D.B. Wise and David Benioff were to make this series before moving on to a more lucrative deal. This method of storytelling was supposed to apply to the Star Wars story films, but they never got a chance to interconnect it. Zero.hu ran an excellent scoop that elaborates on how Project Luminous will kick off with a video game. I don't believe we've gotten an announcement of that. And a lot of information that corroborates the timeline information I've heard. They have heard some of the stories will have the Jedi exploring the unknown regions. make sure you check back with their article, as I feel my information is in direct alignment with theirs, and our stories support one another. For some time, I have heard that Project Luminous was a build-up to the next film era, which my sources are calling the High Republic era. It should be noted that I have very little reason to think that this is going to be the title for the series itself. Because of the volume of Star Wars stories set during the High Republic era, it's difficult to say which emerging characters are going to get a spotlight in these upcoming films. While the series will have Jedi, it will also have heroes that are not Jedi. I cannot concretely define the aesthetic of the new era. The designs are going to likely be grounded in the familiar. The High Republic era, Jason goes on to say, sounds rad. It sounds like they're going to be a rich and lush area to explore with these new projects, comments, and information connected to the films that should tie in more effectively than in the past. Okay, so what does this mean for the information that we actually received? So I'm I'm jumping around here a bit, but to the question of what does this leak mean for what we ended up getting. Okay, well, Matt Martin, who was with Lucasfilm in the story group, was asked a question from an individual on Twitter. Steven Schinder asked, maybe this has been clarified and I missed it, but just wondering if you or anyone else may be able to answer. Was the idea for the High Republic project conceived and developed separate from whatever future films are being developed? That's the impression I get. Matt Martin responded, yes, it was developed independently. That's not to say the era wouldn't be available to storytellers in other mediums, but it was developed for publishing. Okay, so there's a couple of things here. The information that these two sources, MakingStarWars.net and this Zero.hu, it could be correct, right? It could be that there is also going to be a film series set within the same timeline. It could also be that what Jason and this other individual were hearing, because we did not get a video game announcement with this High Republic, even though I believe a video game was, there was a talk of a video game that I thought there was a story that came out. Actually, you know what? Let me go look real quick. Yeah, I was right. So the Respawn co-founder said that they were working on a new Star Wars game, but they had no details other than that. So that might end up being tied to the High Republic, but we just honestly don't know yet. So again, it could be one of a couple of things. It could be that they are going to be developing a movie based off this time period, or it could very well be that this was always just going to be a publishing endeavor, and whatever the films are going to be is something different. Be that as it may, we do have details on what this High Republic is, so let's get into that. But really quick, I want to drop a bit of a tease, because another little nugget just dropped it in my lap in the middle of when I was recording this, and that is another piece of another page from the Rise of Skywalker novel has leaked out, and this particular page is specifically about Palpatine and how he ended up surviving. So I'll be getting to that in my Rise of Skywalker portion of the show a little bit later on, but stick around for that, because this is really, really interesting stuff. All right, so the High Republic, what in the Sam heck is this all about? Here's the article from StarWars.com. Star Wars: The High Republic, which had previously been referred to as Project Luminous, will be set in an era when the Galactic Republic and the Jedi Order are at their zenith, about 200 years before the Phantom Menace. This period on the Star Wars timeline will not overlap with any of the filmed features or series currently planned for production. Will not overlap, giving the creators and partners a vast amount of room to tell Star Wars stories and new adventures and original characters. So, this High Republic era could include, as the leak said, films as well, but perhaps the leak is right, and the films are going to be 400 years before the Phantom Menace and another 200 years before the events that take place in this publishing endeavor. I'm just kind of spitballing here, okay? Lucasfilm President Kathleen Kennedy said, "We're so excited to be opening up such a rich and fertile era for our authors to explore. We'll get to see the Jedi in their prime. The High Republic features the Jedi as we've always wanted to see them, as the guardians of peace and justice. This is a hopeful, optimistic time when the Jedi and the Galactic Republic are at their height. But of course, into this glorious new era, something wicked this way comes, says Lucasfilm publishing creator Michael Singlane. The initiative will give readers, young and old, a new corner of the galaxy to explore through rich, meaningful stories. Plus, readers will learn what scares the Jedi. This was a golden age for the Jedi, also a time of galactic expansion in the Outer Rim, so expect there to be rich tales of exploration, charting out the galaxy, meeting new cultures, and discovering what pioneer life in the Outer Rim was like. This is an incredible sandbox for our storytellers to play in, both within the publishing and beyond, and we can't wait to see the great fiction they build within it. And that's according to James Waugh, who is the Lucasfilm Vice President, Franchise Content and Strategy. The Star Wars High Republic has enlisted top-tier fan favorites Claudia Gray, Justina Ireland, Daniel Jose Older, Cavan Scott, Charles Soule to craft the new era of Star Wars publishing. The first books and comics are set to debut at Celebration in August of 2020. I'll be there. I hope to see you. Added that part myself. The High Republic, The Light of the Jedi, a massive interconnected story that's told across various formats by the publishers. That's what comes out in August. So, Star Wars Explained put out a Project Luminous summary. So I'll just run through a bit of the details in here because Star Wars Explained did a really good job of adding some other stuff. The Jedi of the High Republic are the Jedi Knights of the Round Table. The main villains are called the Nihil, Nihil. I think that's probably a riff on nihilism, right? And are described as space Vikings. There will be stories for every type of Star Wars fan, 200 years before the prequels. The idea for this massive connected story was pitched back in 2014. These are all unique stories, not the same story repeated for different ages. The level of production that went into these stories was reminiscent of film pre-production. The Nihil, and actually it was misspelled first, so it's Nihil. The Nihil are the main villains. They are purportedly meant to be very different from the Empire or the First Order. The Nihil are able to use hyperspace in a very dangerous way, but that's not all. I said that's all, but I don't think I think I meant that's not all. And we know from some of the descriptions of the stories that several of the stories feature some catastrophe taking place in ships dropping out of light speed, out of hyperspace. The driving force behind Project Luminous was new. What have we never seen in Star Wars that still feels like Star Wars? Light of the Jedi by Charles Soule. That's the first book. It comes out on August 25th. That'll establish the era and kick off the adventure. The Wookiee Jedi, whose name I'm not even going... There is a Wookiee Jedi. I'm not even going to try to pronounce the name. We're going to see the great disaster. Something terrible is going to happen at the opening of the novel. Something awful happening at a time of peace and prosperity. A Test of Courage is a middle grade book by Justin Ireland. The main character is a 16-year-old Jedi Knight. She says it's more serious than her previous stories, according to Justina Ireland. The High Republic a comic from Marvel, will be written by Cavan Scott. It will center around the Starlight Station. Into the Dark is by Claudia Gray. The High Republic Adventures from the IDW Publishing will also come out. Everything we've heard so far is just phase 1 of the High Republic. More stories and licensees are coming. We're going to learn more between now and August 5th. All right, so let me add one more detail here, and then I'll get into a bit of my thoughts on the High Republic. Elizabeth Schaefer is part of the marketing group for Disney and Lucasfilm, and said this about Charles Soule's Light of the Jedi. The highest praise I can give for Light of the Jedi, it makes me feel hope. Hope for what can be, hope for what societies can be, hope for what human beings can be. It's a truly beautiful book and a wonderful beginning. # the High Republic. Okay. So that's somebody that works for Lucasfilm. I'm not going to put a ton of stock into that specifically. So, what are my thoughts on this? Well, let me preface all this by saying that because this is a publishing endeavor, I'm giving it a lot of wiggle room, if you will, from any over-the-top criticism by what I've seen so far. Am I going to read these stories? I'm not sure yet. I'm going to see what we find out between now and August. I'm not big on the publishing side of Star Wars. I've read Lost Stars. I've got several of the books that came out that were Legends books now from the prequel era. But I'm not big on, for being an author, I'm just not big on reading the Star Wars books. I do have a level of interest in these stories and what they're doing. I'll be upfront and say this is probably not my go-to choice of an era to go and necessarily explore, or at least the way that they've presented it so far. It sounds a little Star Trek-y to me. All of the artwork that we've seen so far has been centered on the Jedi in their heyday. It looks very clean, glossy, and utopian, and I don't mind that. We got that in the prequels, and I do love the prequels, but there is a lack of sort of that Star Wars edge and that threat that I'm used to. Like when it comes to, and this is all, again, surface level criticism, instinctive reaction to what they've announced with this High Republic. First off, the name High Republic doesn't do anything for me. The era, I think, is interesting, but all the artwork that they presented is all very bright and positive, and Jedis with multicolored lightsabers standing there in their heyday. And I get all that, and I understand the establishment. But when you take the imagery that they presented so far, not a lot of imagery for the villains themselves of this Nihil, or however they want to pronounce it. They did cover it in the announcement video, but that's not the focus of any of this. And you couple that with the talking points that are being presented by the Disney staff, and this, this Elizabeth Schaefer saying, it makes me feel hope for what it can be, what societies can be, hope for what humans can be, a truly beautiful book, a wonderful beginning. I don't go to Star Wars for hope necessarily. Certainly not hopes for society, and certainly, not hopes for human beings. I go for big, grandiose adventures and interesting characters. And so far, we're not really presented with, apart from the one story that I mentioned a moment ago, from the YA novel about the young 16-year-old female Jedi, we're not seeing sort of a central character focus on anything that we've seen so far. It all seems very clean, very utopian, and this idea of exploring the unknown regions in the galaxy comes off very Star Trek-y to me. So I don't know yet. I'm cautiously optimistic it's going to be good, even though this is not probably my first choice of what I would have liked to have seen. If you were asking me, I'd like to go back further, and I'd like to see the beginnings of, maybe go back so far that we see the beginnings of the Force, or we see the Sith versus the Jedi. We go back, way, way back, and see that. I want that tension. I want that turmoil. I like the aesthetic of the Knights of the Old Republic and what we got in the video game. And I'm doing that thing that I've always talked about of, preconceived notions and ideas. So I'll back up all that concern and say, again, these are books. So because they're books, I'm going to give it a bit of the benefit of the doubt until later. I do want to add this part of it, though. And the part of this that I want to add to this High Republic concept is I'm not a big fan of the way that they went about creating it. Watching the announcement video, they got the writers that I mentioned in the press release, and they all got together in a room and in the video, and a lot of people have pointed to this. You got the big whiteboard there, and they have their categories of what they want to see in the stories, and there's a couple of comments up there like, I get it, the diversity part of it, and under one of the categories, it was like not pro-war, and I'm kind of with the individuals that are questioning whether or not this is how you want to go and craft storytelling within the Star Wars universe. I'm not saying that I specifically had any issue with the categories that were up on the board, but I'm not sure that this is the right way to go and craft telling stories within a particular area where we're making decisions via committee, right? If we're going to start doing that, then it's almost like, you might as well get an AI and create an algorithm and have, put in all of the demographic data of what fans are attracted to most based off of sales and let the AI decide what era and what level of threat and what time period that we're supposed to have. I'm a big fan of, hey, we're going to do this era. These are sort of the established norms that we're going to set. Go and do your singular vision story. I get really worried when we're crafting large narratives and it's via committee. I'm a little bit concerned about that. If this was the impetus for films being done the same way, I would be really concerned. Now, films are different. You need a director, you need a writer, and I think there's a general understanding that when it comes to films, you need to let those creative outlets on a much smaller level. A handful of people decide how something's going to go. That's why you have a writer. That's why you have a director. Sometimes that's why you have a writer-director. And I'm of the opinion that oftentimes the writer-director scenario is the best route to go. Certainly that seemed to be the case with the sequel trilogy, which I love, especially The Last Jedi, considering that was written and directed by Rian Johnson. So we'll see. I'm not, again, thrilled about it. I'm more just like, all right, we'll see how this shakes out. Probably let some individuals read these books first to see what their thoughts are. But I don't know. I know the comment was made that this is similar to what Lucasfilm has done between the gaps of other movie series. And so we got, the fill-in gaps of the publishing world between the original trilogy, and then, of course, the sequel trilogy, and then we got the same thing between the sequel trilogy and the prequel trilogy, and now they're going to be filling in this timeline with this High Republic era between now and whatever this 2022 movie is. So I'm looking at all the artwork, and I'm just kind of going, I'm not so sure yet, but we'll see. I do think, and this is a bit of a hot take on this, I think part of Disney's plan is that they have super catered to the original trilogy base, guys like me in their mid to late 40s. They've super served that. We've got the close of the Skywalker saga, we've got the Mandalorian post Return of the Jedi, we've got this Obi-Wan Kenobi series coming out, this Cassian Andor series coming out, all taking place within the time frame of the original trilogy, right around there, right? And then, of course, the sequel trilogy. I think what Disney is doing here is, and this is a hot take but pretty obvious, is, okay, now they're going to start focusing on the individuals that are younger than the original trilogy people. Those individuals that were first introduced to the films with the prequels. And now the prequel era individuals are going to end up being super served with the next round of creative content coming out of Lucasfilm. I think that these authors and writers are very representative of that, and most of them seem just a little bit younger than me, so they probably had aged out of when the original trilogy was in theaters, but were just at the right age when the prequel trilogy came out to have that be sort of their Star Wars, and so that's where these individuals are zeroing in on. I'll be completely honest. I really hope that this is not some politically correct woke version of Star Wars that they're doing. That's what I know that Star Wars has always had kind of a political angle to it. George Lucas has always done that. Good writing goes and does that. I'm crafting the second set of saga stories in my Embark Space Opera series on a very particular event that took place not so long ago that had a major impact on American society. You can probably guess what it is. I don't want to say it right now, but I'm using that as kind of a baseline of how I'm going to go and craft that story. It's not going to be a one-on-one direct comparison, but in terms of the conflict that is going to take place within my second set of saga books, I am definitely going to be drawing from this particular event as the starting point and crafting the story from there. What I'm praying doesn't happen is that the story group isn't looking at the current surface level political landscape that we're all dealing with right now in America and trying to use that as a jump off point to craft these stories, because I go to Star Wars to have an escape and to have a fun adventure and meet these amazing characters and watch them go through their growth and turmoil and heartbreak. And I mean, it's a big reason why I love the sequel trilogy and what Ryan and JJ both did in all of their films. I really hope ultimately the High Republic isn't preachy. And I guess that remains to be seen. I did hear one theory, and then we'll move over and talk about The Rise of Skywalker, because we've got some fun things to share. I'm really excited. I did hear one thing that was kind of cool, though, that I did really dig and that I was excited about. The Space Vikings look rad. I will say that. The villains in this. I hope there is a sense of dread, and it's very typical Star Wars in that sense. But the lightsabers that the Jedis are holding in a lot of the artwork they run the colors. You've got your red, you got your green, you got your purple, you got your yellow. And as we've learned in canon, lightsabers bleed based off of the Force user that owns them. And when you turn to the dark side, the kyber crystals will then go and bleed, and they'll end up turning red. So initially, George Lucas, had said there are just green and blue lightsabers. He made the green one because they couldn't shoot Luke's in the blue background in Yuma, Arizona, but against the blue sky in Return of the Jedi, so they had to go and make it green and things like that. Anyway, somebody made put out a theory that perhaps the Jedi have so many different variances of color during this High Republic era because they were still on the right path, and the Jedi lost their way so bad by the time we got to the prequel trilogy that the only colors left that were bleeding for Force users were green and blue and lilac. I dig that theory. I like it. I don't know if it's the case, but I thought it was fun. That kind of stuff's really neat. It does get me excited. I'll end on this. Reading the High Republic stuff makes me want to go back and watch the prequel trilogy. So I am interested in the High Republic. I am cautiously optimistic. I have a small level of concern, and we will just have to wait and see how the whole thing ends up shaking out. And like they said, we should be getting some more details between now and August.
We are the spark that'll light the fire that'll burn the First Order down.
All right, so we got some fun stuff to talk about when it comes to The Rise of Skywalker. Like I mentioned earlier, I cannot wait to get the physical release of this. I'm not going to lie, I got a bootleg at home. It's the same bootleg everybody's watching. You see all the screen grabs online. That's the same bootleg that's got the Korean subtitles on it, and I've got a copy of that, and I've been watching it. It's totally watchable. I just can't wait to get my hands on a much better copy. Yeah, I know. Shouldn't go and download torrents, but I did, and I'm going to buy who knows how many versions of The Rise of Skywalker, and I've already seen it 15 times, for crying out loud, in the theater. I just love this movie, and the more I see it, the more I love it. But we got some things to talk about. First off, Pablo Hidalgo put this out earlier this month. This came out back on February 2nd. There were all these rumors floating around from a bunch of individuals, no offense, who were really bothered and still are by the ending of The Rise of Skywalker. To each their own. You're all entitled to your opinion. If you hated the end of The Rise of Skywalker, if you hated The Rise of Skywalker, if you hated the way that they handled Ben Solo, man, that is your right to feel that way and to be bothered by that. For me personally, I think it's absolutely beautiful. I thought that JJ did a masterful job wrapping up this series. I love this movie. I connect with those characters. The end of the film and everything that happens with Rey and Ben moves me to the point of tears. I think it is beautiful. I love it. All right. But there were these rumors going around about all these different endings, right? And there was stuff before the even movie came out. They shot all these different endings for the film, and there were going to be Force Ghosts, and that's been shot down. And, if you reverse the image of what happened with Ben Solo at the end, before he disappears, they were messing with it. You can see their mouths talking. All these nonsense stuff that I've talked about on the show before. Okay, Pablo Hidalgo put this out. And he wrote, 1 billion years ago, when episode 8 was getting started, I pitched a 9 ending with Ben living on the island in Luke's place. But that was never anyone's call other than the filmmakers. And what's in 9 was in there once production started, so be very wary of different ending tales. Basically, Pablo Hidalgo is saying, the movie was always going to end that way, people. I appreciate the fact that he was honest about it. All right, I have excerpts from the end of the Rise of Skywalker. So we've got Reylo's End here in my hand. I have the page that talks about that, what happens on Exegol. And then we also have what happens with Ben after his passing. Before we get to that, though, this particular item just dropped from the novel of The Rise of Skywalker, and I'm actually going to be reading this particular excerpt from The Rise of Skywalker for the first time right now on the show. So the excerpt goes like this. All the vials were empty of liquid save one, which was nearly depleted. Kylo peered closer. He'd seen this apparatus before, too, when he'd studied the Clone Wars as a boy. The liquid flowing into the living nightmare before him was fighting a losing battle to sustain the Emperor's putrid flesh. What could you give me? Asked Kylo. That was a line actually in the movie. The Emperor Palpatine lived after a fashion, and Kylo could feel in his very bones that this clone body sheltered the Emperor's actual spirit. It was an imperfect vessel, though, unable to contain his immense power. It couldn't last much longer. Everything, Palpatine said. A new empire. The creature raised his ruined hand. Kylo sensed him drawing on the Force, but before he could react, his surroundings disappeared as if into a fog, and a vision filled their place. So that's where the page ends up cutting off from this particular excerpt. But the whole crux of it is that the Emperor lived using a clone body. So look, I'm totally cool with that, right? And I'm actually going and looking at some of the comments here online because I haven't read them yet here on the Reddit page. All right, I found one comment here that's pretty relevant to this, and it says this. Yeah, pretty much backs up what's implied in the film. Add the visual dictionary's implication that his spirit traveled through the world between worlds via the netherworld to reach Exegol, and that's pretty much his whole deal. Somebody then went and asked, how is that applied in the film? Palpatine's trying to possess bodies and has cloning technology that can make bodies from scratch. Yeah, you know what? Look, I was cool with the explanation given in the movie, meaning the explanation that didn't exist. But I appreciate that ambiguity within Star Wars. These are rules that Star Wars made, and I'm okay with them. And they're rules that we've accepted for a long, long time. And I mentioned that in the previous episode, that there are certain other things in Star Wars that we just accepted a long time ago and didn't question. The fact that repulsor lifts exist and they can lift ships off the ground. Yep. We just accepted that. The fact that you can go to any planet and pretty much breathe the atmosphere and not have any problem. Yep, we accepted that. The fact that there doesn't seem to be any sort of theory of relativity within the Star Wars universe. We just accepted that. So I understand the desire for people when it comes to big things like a Palpatine returning, but at the same time, we're talking about this science fantasy, really fantasy science fiction series, and I just accepted the fact that he was so evil with the dark side that he was able to keep his body alive somehow, and if that body ended up being some sort of weird clone version, and his spirit was possessing it, I am absolutely okay with that. Again, I really like Palpatine's return. It puts the other films in a really interesting light now, going back and watching The Force Awakens, and especially watching that final fight between Kylo Ren and Rey. It's fantastic now to see Rey have so much angst and anger knowing now that Palpatine is her grandfather. I think it works really, really well. All right, let's get to the ending of The Rise of Skywalker and these pages from the book. I guess I should have put out a spoiler alert if you didn't want to know these, but I figured, if you heard me saying I was going to be reading excerpts of the book, then I'm going to be reading excerpts from the book. All right, so let's go here to Rey and Kylo's end. And it's funny because the way that this particular thing reads, it's a little bit tough because I printed it up, but let me see if I can't get a better version here. Hold on 1 second. That's better. I blew it up on my iMac screen. All right. So this is after Rey has defeated Palpatine. Ben poured everything into her. He found reservoirs he didn't know he had. He gave her his whole self. Her diaphragm rose with a breath, and her warm hand covered his. Her eyes lit up. Rey seemed surprised to see him. She sat up, but she didn't draw away. They stared at each other for a moment. He waited for her to understand what had happened. It would be okay if she left him behind now, got on with her life without a backward glance at him. It's what she should do. Instead, she smiled and whispered Ben. She was glad to see him, glad to be with him in this moment. It was the greatest gift she could have given him. His heart was full as Rey reached for his face, let her fingers linger against his cheek, and then, wonder of wonders, she leaned forward and kissed him. A kiss of gratitude, acknowledgement of their connection, celebration that they'd found each other at last. But then she drew back, concern on her face. She could feel him growing cold. Ben smiled at her. He had given Rey back to the galaxy. It wouldn't atone for the darkness he'd wrought, but it was what he could do. Ben Solo had no regrets as he collapsed to the ground. The Force reached for him in welcome. His final awareness was of Rey clasping his hand with her own. Rey stood over the place Ben had fallen, staring down at his empty tunic. Tears streamed down her face. He had sacrificed everything for her. She did not mourn Kylo Ren. She would never mourn Kylo Ren. And then I'm going to skip forward. This was page... Okay, so this is actually the next page. The girl who had felt alone for all those years on Jakku had been part of a dyad the whole time. And just when she discovered that precious connection, that incredible oneness was ripped away. A voice came through the Force, clear and strong. "I will always be with you," Ben said. She smiled, let the truth of it wash over her. "No one's ever really gone," she whispered. She retrieved her lightsabers and sprinted from the ruined cathedral. The moment Rey came back to herself, Finn knew. He launched himself out of the turret seat. No one was pursuing them anyways, climbed down the ladder and sprinted for the cockpit. "Chewie, I felt her," he said. Chewie roared something, wishful thinking, and then it cuts off here at the end of the page. So, not a lot of sort of additional content apart from the getting a bit of the inside feeling perspective of the characters. But I will say that I'm, again, really glad that I had the opportunity to read that, and it just reinforces my feelings towards the film that I already have about how beautiful the end of that movie is for me. I'm curious for individuals who didn't like the ending of the movie, whether or not that is going to be enough to maybe perhaps get them to enjoy the film in a way that they didn't before. So leave a comment, talkshownerd@gmail.com, or you can leave a comment up on YouTube as well. But I just really thought that the addition of what was put there in the text and how it didn't, go and push back against anything, it just added to what we already saw on screen. That's how I already felt watching the movie. From the way that Rey came back to the way that Kylo waited for her, and his shock and surprise that she stayed, that she didn't leave. His expectation was that she was going to get up and bolt and leave, but she didn't. And then she leaned in for that beautiful, touching, and glorious kiss that they got, which just is one of my favorite moments in the entire sequel trilogy. I just think it's absolutely and totally beautiful. We had a comment on listener feedback that I want to share again for those that may have missed it, because I just thought that it was a very interesting take on how the end of The Rise of Skywalker ended up playing out. And this is real quickly, this is what Claire had to say. "The moment that really moved me was when Rey places the two lightsabers on either side of that piece of cloth, then rolls them toward one another and ties them together. To me, this act symbolizes the coming together of both Luke and Leia in the Force, but also the coupling of Rey and Ben. These are the sabers they used to stand against Palpatine. They are united as a dyad in the Force, the two that are one. The last scene isn't overly triumphant, but it is rather bittersweet. It portrays a pilgrimage and a ritual, with Rey paying her respects to those who have helped her on her journey. And then the final image of the twin sons The rise of Skywalker, personified in Rey, made possible because Ben, the last Skywalker, gave his life to revive her, and now his spirit lives in her too. And I really, really like the way that Claire worded that, and I totally agree with the way that that plays out. And just to be able to read into that. I'll be very interested to see, and I'll probably, speaking of reading and writing books, I'll probably be picking up a copy of the Rise of Skywalker novel because I love that movie so much. I want to read. I want to read the story, which doesn't happen very often for me. Again, I write stories. I don't read them all that much. Again, TalkShowNerd@gmail.com or leave a comment up on YouTube. So, speaking of the Rise of Skywalker, I spent a couple of episodes kind of going plot point by plot point, scene by scene in the movie, sharing my thoughts on it. And I just wanted to do a real quick wrapping up of the film, because the last time that we were talking about this, I was to the point of Kef Burr and arriving there to go to the Death Star 2. Again, when we're talking about the pacing, I thought the pacing of all of Kef Burr was great. Meeting of Jannah and the other mutinied First Order troopers, as we come to find out in that great exchange between Finn and Jannah on the Millennium Falcon. I do have a criticism. I do criticize on occasion. Two things that I don't like about what J.J. Abrams does, and specifically what he did with The Rise of Skywalker, is I would have liked just a little bit more explanation on modes of transportation. And I've mentioned this before. The TIE Whisper, one goes down on Pisana. One of them has the Wayfinder in it, the one that Rey uses to fly away from on the Death Star 2, is presumably the one that Kylo Ren flies down from the Star Destroyer on Kijimi. So, I'm fine with there being multiple TIE Whispers, but again, for individuals that are looking for, you talk about getting a little bit more background on specific items like Palpatine, it's stuff like that to me can be handled by just showing a quick shot of a hangar with multiple TIE Whispers in it. You can take care of that. Because I love those moments. I love the fact that we get to see Rey pilot the Falcon, pilot a TIE Whisper, and pilot the X-Wing in The Rise of Skywalker. It's one of the reasons why I love the film. I love the fact that she's flying in different vehicles. But it's that type of ambiguity sometimes that I kind of go, Reh. And then look, that rings true too for Kylo Ren getting to Exegol in a TIE fighter. Okay, I can forgive it, just like I can forgive the fact that it doesn't seem like the door of Luke's hut's been rectified. I've looked at that X-Wing 6 ways to Sunday 15 different times watching The Rise of Skywalker, and there is no missing panel that accounts for the door. It does not ruin my movie experience, but I wish that they would have gone to address that. Okay, so along those same lines, because my other complaint that I've talked about is I would have liked a longer linear battle over Exegol when it comes to the spaceships, because I love vehicles so much. I would have liked to have seen a better, or at least an explanation why, if the landing gear was busted, why did the Millennium Falcon have to screech to a grinding halt? Why couldn't Poe just float it down on the repulsor lifts and land it flat? That just seemed odd to me. But it's funny because, now that I think about it, this is a reoccurring theme in Star Wars movies. For those that don't remember, the same thing happens in Solo. In Solo, when they steal the ATTE or whatever, the hauler, right? At the beginning of the movie, the ship that they fly around on, the one that they pull the train heist on, when they leave the train heist with Han flying it, the next shot you see is Beckett and Han and Chewie, right, on Xandor, right? In the snow, they're doing the makeshift funeral for the fallen character, right, whose name suddenly now escapes me. Val. Slipped my mind from it. Val. But if you notice, that ship they were flying it's embedded into the snow, like it crashed the same way the Falcon crashed in the, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe I'm missing something. Maybe when the landing gear breaks, it turns off the repulsor list too. I've done similar cheats in my book. So that's my only complaint when it comes to what happened on Kef Burr. I know they had to figure out some sort of plot mechanism to keep the cast on the Millennium Falcon working on it while Rey goes off on that skiff, which I think is amazing. I love the scene when she's on the water. Everything surrounding the Death Star 2, I think, is fantastic. her climbing up through the wreckage, getting to the throne room, meeting her dark side self, everything from when Kylo Ren shows up all the way through their battle and Han showing back up in that vision. I adore this portion of the movie. I absolutely love it. And the capstone of that whole thing with Rey piloting a TIE fighter and taking it to Ahch-To, I just thought was perfect. Kylo, Ben Solo, and Han, emotional. They don't linger on it. It does exactly what it's supposed to do. Again, the pacing is perfect. Same thing with the revisit to Ahch-To with Luke and the exchange that he and Rey have there and their conversations. It doesn't linger there. They're there on Ahch-To just enough. And I love that flashback scene with Luke and Leia. I know, and I agree with some people, the CGI work with Leia in the flashback scene is a little bit wonky, but man, I just love that flashback scene. Rey leaving on the X-Wing, the fleet leaving for Exegol, just epic Star Wars shots that just make my heart soar, right? And then we get down to the end of the movie, and I don't want to tread over frozen ground, but I really love the way the whole thing plays out. It's very Star Wars-y. It's echoing what happens when at the end of Return of the Jedi, but it does it in a much different and fresh way. I see callbacks to the big arena when it comes to Attack of the Clones. Again, I would have liked to have seen something a little bit easier to follow when it comes to the space battle over Exegol, but the stuff that we get of the Orbaks and the lander and the running across the Star Destroyer, and that's the focus, right? And I got to imagine, like, if I had the opportunity to interview JJ, I'd asked him about it, and I can't help but wonder if JJ was just like, nah, you know what? We've had space battles. I wanted to have the action focused on what Finn and Janna and Rose were all doing on the Star Destroyer, which I think is fantastic. Rey, Palps, and Ben. I don't know how you do it any better. I completely bought the understanding of what was happening. The battle with the Knights of Ren was great. There's some really great moments in that fight scene between Ben Solo and the Knights of Ren. The way that he puts the lightsaber behind his back, and the one time when he jumps and he flips over one of them. The taking out of those red guards that lead up to that epic moment where the camera pans around and they both raise their lilac lightsabers at the same time. It's all just fantastic. And then we get to the end of the film after, all of the emotion. I love the leaving of Exegol and how everything kind of brightens up, like the fog of the dark side has been lifted. And then we get this, again, perfectly paced reunion on Asian Kloss. I've mentioned before that I had a bit of an expectation that we would get a more expansive finale to the film with seeing all these key characters going back home, but I actually agree with the way that they did it in doing more of a celebration like Return of the Jedi. That keeps more in theme with what Star Wars does. I would have liked to have seen those key characters ending up or wherever their home is, but at the same time, I'm totally satisfied that we didn't, and quite honestly, I think the emotional impact of the film, that particular reunion on Asian Kloss at the end, and the last time that we see all of our characters together, and certainly when Rey sees Finn and Poe, and those tears run down her face, and she's all battered, and they go in for that group hug, and the music soars, and Chewie's got his medal from the Battle of Yavin. It's just fantastic. And then, like Claire said in her email, and she said it, better than I could, that pilgrimage that Rey goes on, whether or not she stays there on Tatooine, I think, that's open to interpretation. I just find the moment really endearing. That here we get to revisit the original trilogy, and while there's a part of me that wishes we would have gone all the way back to the beginning of the chronological order and ended things perhaps on Naboo, I do understand the significance of ending it on Tatooine, especially given, the franchise in and of itself and the Twin Suns and how Revenge of the Sith ended on Tatooine. And we started in A New Hope on Tatooine, and now we're ending again on Tatooine. I'm cool with all of that. And I think the ending is perfect when she gets asked by that woman, Rey Hu, and she sees the Force ghosts of Luke and Leia. I love this movie. I again, in a way that I really didn't think that I was going to. I walked out of the theater really happy with what I saw, not conflicted in the way that I was with The Last Jedi, and didn't really consider the fact that that initial feeling would end up growing for this, growing my admiration for this film the way that it did. TalkShowNerd@gmail.com. You can leave a comment on YouTube and support the podcast. I really would appreciate it. Now that the show is over, I hope that you will take a moment and go directly over to Amazon.com. As I've mentioned before, selling books isn't easy. Selling books is kind of hard. And I can use this platform to go and promote the books, and I hope that you'll support my efforts by supporting my attempts to become an author. The reviews for Embark have been, for both books, for books 1 and 2, have been fantastic. A lot of people are really eager for me to get book 3 out, The Vanishing War. It's being edited right now. These stories are meant to be science fiction space operas. The original story was an idea that I had to create a morality tale with very specific goals in mind, the same way that George Lucas did with A New Hope. It's one of the things that I love about The New Hope, and I've mentioned this many times, is that A New Hope, it's very clear. You've got this hero's journey who's going on this adventure. He's trying to return the stolen plans to the princess, and they end up on the Death Star along the way, and there's a very clear goal at the end. You know exactly how it's going to play out. The stakes are high, and I wanted to create my own universe like that. I based it on Earth in the distant future, where air and spaceflight culture has replaced car culture. I took a lot of ideas from the Fast and Furious franchise, specifically the custom cars, being able to customize cars, and I applied it to the vehicles that I have in my story called T-Crafts. They are fully customizable. You can switch parts around, and our hero in the story is in love with a girl. She gets thrust in the middle of this mystery after she receives a message from her deceased scientist father. While they go and try to unravel this mystery along with their band of friends, the planet Earth gets thrown into industrial chaos and turmoil, and a planet-wide evacuation is called. In the middle of this, a corporate madman who's been covertly building his own military for this very purpose tries to go and exploit the disaster. And it's going to be up to our heroes, who now find themselves in the middle of this potential conflict, and the means to go and save humanity from this horrible, awful madman named Sint Argum. That's the core of the story for Embark Book 1. Book 2, we get the further adventures of our main characters, and it's all going to wrap up in this arc. Will wrap up in Book 3 coming out in late March. So go to Amazon.com. That's my pitch. Ebook, paperback, and audiobook are available right now. If you've already purchased it and you like them, please go to Amazon anyways and leave a review if you haven't done so already. And if you purchase the book and you're going, John, I've already purchased the books, go and buy them for a friend. You can gift them right there from Amazon.com. Search for Embark, Jon, Jon Justice. All right, 2 more things. I do have a website, mynerdworld.net. You can get more information about the books there. There's concept art for the covers. Even for Book 3, available there at the website at mynerdworld.net. And if you want to be on the mailing list, where I send out information periodically, not only about this show, but about all the shows that I do and the books that I'm writing, I will not spam you. You only get emails from me. I do not sell your information to anybody. But if you want to be on the mailing list, just email talkshownerd@gmail.com, and I will put you right on the list. Just say, hey, John, put me on the list. Thanks for supporting the show. I look forward to you purchasing my books. Is that presumptuous of me? And I hope you really enjoyed the podcast this week. I'll be back again next week. 2 shows. Listener feedback show coming out on Thursday or Friday, and then the weekend show just like this. And we'll cover any news that breaks between now and then. But I hope you have a great week. All right. I'm going to go eat some pizza because I'm hungry. And maybe go watch that bootleg copy of The Rise of Skywalker that I have. Have a great one, guys. Bye.
The Force will be with you. Always.
My Nerd World.